afternoon, and welcome to the first webinar in our wellness series. AnyStep Community Services has teamed up with 2 dietitians from UT Southwestern's Comprehensive Cancer Center to bring you the latest news on nutrition and cancer prevention. My name is Sydney Portilla Diggs, and I'm the Executive Director and founder of the nonprofit organization AnyStep Community Services. Our mission is to support older adult households in the greater Dallas and Fort Worth area with food insecurity. Food insecure older adults are at an increased risk for poor nutrition. Inadequate nutrition can lead to chronic illness and disease. We are so excited that you're joining us to learn how a well-balanced diet can reduce your cancer risk, reduce your risk of recurrence, and benefit your overall health. Our moderator for the question and answer session is Renee Perry. Renee is the Chief Operating Officer at the Senior Source. The Senior Source is a nonprofit organization serving older adults and family caregivers in the greater Dallas area for more than 60 years. During the presentation, we will welcome your questions. Please place them in the chat and Renee will collect the questions, and at the conclusion, she will deliver them to our dietitians for answers. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panel of speakers. We have Shelli Hardy. Shelli is a registered dietitian who earned a Master's of Clinical Nutrition degree from the University of Texas at Southwestern Medical Center. She has provided medical nutrition therapy in both acute and outpatient setting. Shelli holds a specialty certification in oncology. She specializes in medical nutrition therapy for patients with cancer of the gastrointestinal system who are receiving treatment at UT Southwestern. Shelli has a passion for providing individualized, evidence-based nutrition intervention strategies for this population both during and after treatment. And then we have Michelle Hamilton. Michelle Hamilton is a registered dietitian and certified specialist in oncology at UT Southwestern. She received her undergraduate degree at Baylor University and her master's degree at UT Southwestern. Michelle has a genuine passion for oncology and has been an oncology dietitian for over 5 years. She also has a focus on cancer survivorship and leads a 6-week healthy eating class for oncology patients. So without further ado, let me turn it over to our dietitians for the presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Again, I am Shelli Hardy, and I'm one of the dietitians at the Cancer Center. And we're going to be here today, and we're so honored to be working with Renee and Sydney and to be a part of this presentation. So we're going to talk primarily about nutrition and cancer prevention, but we're really going to throw in there some recommendations and some advice for managing some other chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension. So next slide. And again, so honored and privileged to work with Sydney and Renee. Next slide. So what are we going to learn today? We're going to first of all talk a little bit about the risk factors in the environment, how the diet can actually play a part in some of these risk factors, but more importantly, how can we include some of those foods that will actually reduce your risk? And then towards the end, Michelle is going to give you some practical suggestions for how you might implement this in your own life. So next slide. So here are some things we like to differentiate. First of all, there are things we cannot control. So we're not going to worry here about genetics or age or gender or race or even what height you are. And I know that one sounds crazy, but there are some cancers where your risk is actually increased if you attain your adult height very early. So we can't control that. But what we can control, things like our diet, to some extent our weight, reducing some of the things in the environment and in our lifestyle like smoking or tobacco use. How can we change our alcohol intake? How can we increase our activity level no matter where we are to start? And then lastly, if you're a young person and you're still in childbearing years, can you have the choice to perhaps breastfeed your children, and what would that do? So next slide. So one big piece of the education we give our patients at the Cancer Center is really to help them differentiate what are some safe and trustworthy resources that you can go to when you have questions on these things. And there are so many blogs and internet resources that are not trustworthy and perhaps will give you the wrong information. So our favorite for prevention, and one we're going to really lean on today, is the American Institute of Cancer Research. So they look at all of the research in the world on both lifestyle and nutrition around cancer prevention and give us some really solid recommendations that we like to utilize. So next slide. So I don't love this infographic, but these are the top 10 recommendations, and we're going to go into these in detail. But what I like to point out is this is really appropriate information for people wanting to prevent cancer, for people that have been diagnosed with cancer, and also for people after treatment. So really safe and comprehensive recommendations. So next slide. So first of all, not a super popular topic, but we like to break it down a little bit, and that is weight. So being a healthy weight, or at least closer to your healthy weight, can be an important piece of preventing not only cancer, but other chronic diseases. And just to differentiate, the weight around our middle, which I know as we get older is that harder weight to fight, but that is the weight that's a little bit more dangerous. So the American Institute for Cancer Research really recommends that men be under about 37 inches when we measure around the waist, and women about 31.5 inches. And that is because, you know, that fat in our middle is what we call visceral fat. And that's the kind of fat that really wreaks havoc with not only, you know, just having more weight, but our liver function and our other organs that are right there in the middle. So you hear about the increase in fatty liver disease. And I would say the good news on this is we know even a reduction of as little as 3% in your weight can really improve that fatty liver. We know a reduction in your weight of as little as 5 to 10% can really reduce that risk of cancer. And so we recommend any change is a good change, and really, again, watch out for those fad diets that we find on the internet and in media, because that result, when we have those overly restrictive diets to get to our goals, we see that yo-yo excuse me, effect. And we know this is really more harmful long-term. So next slide. So again, just to illustrate, you know, the importance of this topic, there are many cancers that are related to being overweight or obese. And next slide. So we want to talk about, you know, why is this true? At one time, we thought that fat was just kind of there, that it really wasn't active and really didn't cause any additional harm. But with research over the last years, you know, out of UT Southwestern, as well as many other academic universities, you know, throughout the world, we know that fat is actually very metabolically active. So those fat cells, one thing that they do that really relates to all kind of chronic disease is that fat will create an environment of chronic inflammation. So you may have heard of systemic inflammation, and cancer likes inflammation, but really so does heart disease and diabetes. So we want to reduce that fat so we can reduce that. We can also regulate our hormones a little bit easier. We can lower that estrogen level. We know that some cancers are linked to that higher estrogen. And then one piece that's important is the insulin resistance. So with more weight, we often develop what we call insulin resistance, where you can't process that glucose in the bloodstream. And so there are higher levels of something we call insulin-like growth factor that may be a growth factor. So again, we like to explain the why of things so that maybe it helps us be motivated to make some of these little changes. Next slide. So again, this is not a one culprit thing for why are we having these problems. This is really a worldwide issue, and we know a piece of this is really education, which is why we're doing what we're doing today. It's starting early with children in schools. It's labeling foods properly. It's access to healthy food. So again, this is not a real simple problem that we're going to solve with one intervention. Next slide. So physical activity, this is a big piece, and I really want to stress here, you start with this where you are. We are not proponents of telling people to go run a mile. If you're maybe not able to get up and move, maybe you have a chronic disability, we say, do what you can, work with professionals that might help you, because we know that any change can really help with that hormone level. It can reduce that systemic inflammation. It can boost that immune function. So that doesn't just protect us from cancer, but also viruses, things like COVID or the flu. And the gut transit time, that's a piece of reducing that constipation that can be a chronic issue. But again, I talk about little changes. If we can stand up and move a little bit, during the commercials for TV, the 30 minutes, so 5 times a week recommendation really can be broken down to 10 minutes at a time, 3 times a day. Or again, there are wonderful resources for chair exercises if you're not able to get up and move. So a lot of options there. We don't have to do anything real hard. Next slide. If, again, you're at a place where you have a lot of seated work, whether that's in your home or at work, we can see there's a big difference when we ride in our car to work, we sit at our desk all day, versus when we're really intentional. Maybe we walk around at lunchtime, maybe we're able to bike to work. A lot of options, and I'd say I have to work very hard to be not like Anne here, but more like Joe. So it really does take being thoughtful about that. Next slide. Number 3, we're going to talk quite a bit about, and that really is that diet rich in vegetables and fruits and beans and whole grains. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But number 4, the reduction of those fast foods. So again, here we're not saying you can never, go to a fast food restaurant and you can never have that convenience. But these foods tend to be very high in the saturated fats, which we don't want because of heart disease, as well as high in sugar and high in salt. So for most of us, we want to stay around 2,400 milligrams a day. If you have hypertension or you've been told you're salt sensitive, that might be closer to 2,000 milligrams or less. So the way we try to manage this is by really becoming a label reader. And I think you'll be surprised where the sodium in our diet lies. Sometimes it's in things that don't really taste salty, more like your baked goods and your breads. And just trying to reduce those where you can really can be impactful. Also flavoring things with herbs and spices. And again, we'll give you some more concrete examples as we get further into this. So next slide. So this is one of my favorite parts of the American Institute of Cancer Research website, the AICR.org. And again, that's on your handout. But you can go through here and you can click on these different foods and find out why maybe they'll be beneficial in fighting cancer. what we like to stress is that it's really that overall diet. So it's that combination of foods, not any one food. But again, kind of interesting and fun and great things to add in to your diet. Next slide. So number 5, limiting consumption of red and processed meats. So first of all, to define those red meats, and that really is your pork and your beef and your lamb. So pork is not the other white meat. We want to count that as a red meat. But the AICR has looked at the research and they've found that up to 12 to 18 ounces of red meat per week are not likely to increase your cancer risk. And so that's a pretty generous amount of those things. On the other hand, the processed meat. So now we're talking about more the red processed meats like bacon and hot dogs and salami, things like that. We really do want to, lower that intake, maybe make that more of the exception than a daily part of your diet, because there is a real association with colon cancer risk there. So next slide. So all this to say, back one please, a plant-based diet. So when we talk about a plant-based diet, we are not saying you have to become a vegan or a vegetarian. We're looking at the research around adding more of those plant foods into your daily and weekly intake. And that really does include all those fruit, vegetables. By whole grains, we mean things like your brown rice, maybe quinoa or whole grain pastas or breads or whole wheat breads, beans and lentils and fruits and nuts. And then just really reducing the intake of some of those animal products like your meats and your eggs. We know that a plant-based diet is really rich in fiber and vitamins and minerals as well, but that fiber can really reduce the risk of things like colon cancer. But soluble fiber, which is our soft fiber that's in a lot of these foods, can also reduce the bad cholesterol. So we look at advantages in reducing heart disease, diabetes, helping maintain your weight, and also reducing your cancer risk. So a couple of examples of these dietary patterns that are appropriate and fit into this model include the Mediterranean diet, which I'm very fond of, and we're going to talk about in just a second, and then the DASH diet, and you may have heard of that, specifically around heart disease, but really appropriate for cancer prevention as well. Next slide. So this is a simple way to start. I often like to talk about the healthy eating plate with people, and really this is just a visual. If you can make your plate about 3/4 of plant-based foods, so your fruits, your vegetables, again those whole grains, and then that healthy protein, that could be your red meat a couple of times a week, but that also could be a serving of beans or lentils, and that could be maybe a night where you have a totally plant-based food. So a lot of options there, but an easy way to visualize some of those recommendations. Next slide. So here's the Mediterranean dietary pattern. Again, probably the one I recommend the most. And you'll see what's interesting. The base of this is really increased activity and socialization. So can you eat meals often with family or friends? The nutrition base of this includes those things you're going to get tired of hearing me talk about, which are those fruits and vegetables, also nuts and seeds. And there's a big emphasis on olive oil here, whenever you can use that salad dressing or maybe in place of butter in a dipping sauce for some bread. And that has an anti-inflammatory property of its own. The seafood in the diet is a big piece of how people that live in this part of the world eat. And things like salmon, tuna, mackerel, even anchovies have something called omega-3s. And you may have heard of those because those also offer anti-inflammatory benefits. And still allowed is some poultry, some eggs, some yogurt, some cheese. And then you'll see at the top the meats and the sweets and the processed foods, those are more of a treat. So we want to eat those less often. Michelle will talk about alcohol a little bit more and the risk factors for cancer. I just like to point out the way it's used in countries like Greece and Italy. It's usually used with the meal in very moderate amounts. So that's a very different way than sometimes we use it here in America. Next slide. So phytochemicals. So those are the beautiful chemicals that plants make that really protect us. They act as antioxidants, which really just means they protect those healthy cells from things in the body and the blood that really like to attack. And again, this is as simple as eating that beautiful, colorful diet. Don't forget your mushrooms if you like those, and adding interesting herbs and spices where you can. So beautiful, colorful foods, and often eating seasonally. So what's available, as we get into spring can be an interesting way to increase this. So next slide. So just again, looking at the science, what do phytochemicals do? And we see words like apoptosis, and that just means they kill those bad cells, those cells that we want to get rid of because maybe they've been changed by something in our environment. They boost our immune system. They can actually protect our DNA from damage in the first place. And then again, you see the importance of that reduction of inflammation. So all these things working together can be helpful. Next slide. So number 6, really limiting the consumption of some of our sugar sweetened drinks and foods. And here I look at also a great way to reduce weight a little bit. So if maybe you're in the habit of drinking more soda or tea or some of the coffee drinks, here might be a place that we could reduce that amount and really get some advantages, not only weight, but in cancer prevention. So one important differentiation here is we're not talking about the sugars that naturally occur in things like fruits and things like yogurts. We're talking about those added sugars. And we follow the American Heart Association's recommendations, where we're saying on a good day, we want to stay under about 25 grams of these added sugars for women and about 36 or less for men. So next slide. So how do we know how many sugars are added into foods? And thankfully, there is now a new nutrition label, which you've probably seen. And if you'll look there under the carbohydrates, you'll see total sugars, but you'll also see added sugars. So my favorite way to describe this is if you bought some Greek yogurt, plain Greek yogurt, there wouldn't be any added sugars. They'd all just be your total sugars and carbohydrates. But if you bought some flavored yogurt, you would see those added sugars. So if this was an example here, I could say maybe, okay, I'm going to eat this. I'm going to have 10 grams of my added sugars. So I have maybe 15 left, so I can stay under my 25 grams a day. So now I'm going to turn over the rest of the information to my colleague and friend, Michelle Hamilton. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Shelli. All right, moving on to number 7 from the recommendations of the American Institute of Cancer Research, and that is about alcohol. So the recommendation is to limit your alcoholic beverages to 2 a day for men and 1 a day for women. A serving size of alcohol, just as a refresher, is a 12-ounce beer, 5-ounce serving of wine, or a 1.5-ounce serving of liquor. There is convincing evidence, as you can probably imagine, that alcohol increases your risk of several different types of cancer, and that research is, continuing to be developed. It also shows that alcohol can be particularly harmful when combined with smoking. And that's because the alcohol can actually make it easier for those carcinogens in tobacco to penetrate those damaged cells. So something to really consider if you are someone that is still using tobacco. There's also some additional research that's coming out that's showing that certain phytochemicals do have protective effects against alcohol consumption whenever you're eating a meal. So again, kind of going back to some of the research that we know with the Mediterranean diet and kind of how they consume alcohol in their diet pattern. This slide I know is a little bit complicated, but we just wanted to emphasize that there is some additional research for cancers that are considered estrogen sensitive cancers, and that can include certain types of breast cancer and endometrial and ovarian cancer. And so there's an additional recommendation to limit your alcoholic beverages even further to only 1 to 2 servings a week for those type of cancers. Number 8, which may be surprising to a lot of folks, is really to not use supplements for cancer prevention. As dietitians, we are going to be recommending food first, and that is going to be coming through whole food sources. Also, there's strong evidence that some high-dose supplements can actually increase your risk of certain cancers. So natural doesn't necessarily mean safe. However, there are supplements that are recommended, and that is if there is a known or likely deficiency. So vitamin D is a really great example of that, and you may have heard that recommendation from your doctor to consume a vitamin D supplement. That can be a vitamin that is harder for our bodies to create and convert as we age. It's also harder for people with darker skin tones to convert that vitamin D through sun exposure. So that is a supplement that we often recommend. And calcium is another supplement that you may have heard from your doctor, and that one again is another great recommendation. So just speak with your doctor or registered dietitian before starting a certain vitamin or supplement, just to make sure that it is safe. Number 9 is for mothers, or if you have family members that are within this age, that to really breastfeed your baby, because we know that now that breastfeeding is really good for both mother and baby. It can protect against breast cancer if you are breastfeeding your baby for more than 6 months. And we also have some good research showing that the babies are less likely to become overweight or obese. Knowing that isn't always an option for all moms, but something to keep in mind. And then number 10, to kind of circle back, is for cancer survivors to continue to follow this recommendation for cancer prevention. Moving on to heart disease and diabetes prevention, we wanted to really emphasize that, even if you aren't necessarily just focused on cancer prevention, there's a lot of overlap here with the recommendations from some of our major organizations here. So for heart disease prevention, they do have 7 key risk factors that they have identified and emphasized for heart disease prevention, and they're listed here. So one is about managing cholesterol and reducing our blood sugar and blood pressure, controlling our weight, smoking, exercising, and consuming a healthy diet. They emphasize consuming more fruits and vegetables, whole grains, really great sources of protein listed here as well, and incorporating some plant-based sources of protein, really similar to what we've been talking about with the American Institute of Cancer Research recommendations. They do have an emphasis on vegetable oils, and we listed non-tropical vegetable oils here too, so you may be wondering what that means. So that excludes oils like palm oil and coconut oil. So both of those are actually fairly high in saturated fat. even though in recent media and news, sometimes it gets included in some of the healthier fats, when indeed it's actually not considered a healthy fat and not something that you should be consuming on a regular basis. They also emphasize the importance of kind of trying to minimize some of those processed foods, and they do have specific recommendations on added sugar, and of course there's some recommendations there about salt too. Moving on to type 2 diabetes. This information comes from the CDC. So their recommendations are to try to lose a little bit of body weight. That can significantly reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes. Try to stay as active as you can, again, in moderation, and whatever you are able to do with your current limitations. And then again, there's a focus here on eating those fruits and vegetables and whole grains. More specifically, they do emphasize those non-starchy vegetables. So non-starchy vegetables include things like your leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower, but they don't include things like potatoes and corn and peas. And then they also have an emphasis on the type of carbohydrates here. So we want to reduce those added sugars when we can. Try to consume grains that are considered whole grains, and trying to get in a little bit more fiber with those whole grains so we can stay full and help manage those blood sugars when we can. And then focusing more on whole foods instead of processed foods. There is also a resource here in Dallas through the Dallas Metropolitan YMCA. It is part of the diabetes prevention program, and we can send you some additional information on that after the session is over. But a really great free resource through Tracy Burns. Lots of locations that are available to you and free, and there is currently a virtual option as well, which is great. So we gave you all of these information, all of these facts and information, but how do we actually convert that into action? How do we actually make these healthy choices, healthy changes? So we definitely want to give you some practical resources here to make it a little bit more feasible in your day-to-day lives. So main principle here is to try to cook at home when you can. So research shows that cooking at home can improve your quality of life. It helps us consume less calories, we get in more fiber, and less of those unwanted ingredients such as sugar, salt, and saturated fat. And then an additional piece of this is actually it creates really healthy habits. So whenever we do go out to eat, we're less likely to eat larger portions because our bodies and our minds are conditioned to kind of eating those smaller plates that we eat at home. And these meals don't have to be complex. So we don't have to turn our homes into a top chef kitchen every single night. So, it's okay to, lean on simple recipes whenever we're short on time and things like that. So kind of how do we cook more at home? How do we start practicing these good habits at home? The first step is to really kind of develop a master list or a good recipe list. So finding healthy recipes. So some things to think about, and that I personally think about whenever I'm looking at my week and developing, a grocery list and a meal plan, is my schedule. So what does my week look like? Is it very hectic, or is it not as hectic and I have a little bit more time to prepare my meals this week? What do my lunches look like? Am I going to be really busy, or am I going to be on the go? Do I need meals that can't be reheated? Just all sorts of things to consider. Looking at what's already in your pantry and your budget is key. So we want to make sure that we're not purchasing, duplicate ingredients when we can, to prevent food waste and to prevent food spoilage. So take a quick look at what you already have in your pantry, and maybe some meal ideas will come to mind. Try to think seasonally. So like Shelli said, whenever she showed you that beautiful chart of all of the foods that fight cancer, it's important to try to include these foods whenever they are naturally in season, because they're going to have the highest nutrient value or nutritional value during that time. So a great way to do that is to look at what's on sale, because usually the produce that's on sale is what's in season. Now that we're coming into the spring and summer months, we're going to have some really great options. Try to look at maybe adding a little bit of variety or balance when we can. I know that can be a challenge when you're meal prepping and things like that, but variety can prevent you from kind of getting bored with kind of reusing the same ingredients. And then, like I mentioned, make sure that you keep a master list of all of these recipes. And if you do modify them, make sure that you're taking notes and helping yourself out in the future. Here's a great slide here for lots of healthy recipes. These are the websites that we recommend often to our patients. For the sake of time, I won't go into each individual one, but did want to highlight that the American Institute of Cancer Research does have a wonderful list of healthy recipes, and they will fall in line with a lot of these recommendations that we've mentioned today. Cooking Light is another wonderful option. If you are someone that's struggling to find more vegetarian or plant-based meals, we included a couple of resources here as well. A Couple Cooks, and then Food Heaven Made Easy. Food Heaven Made Easy also does a lot of kind of comfort food variations on plant-based meals, which we really love, just to kind of introduce some good alternatives to some of those comfort foods. The cookbooks, if you're someone that enjoys cookbooks as much as I do, you want actually a paper copy sometimes to really go through recipes and see pictures and things like that. So the 30-minute Mediterranean diet cookbook is a wonderful cookbook. They have simple ingredients there, and I love some of the variations that they've made. They have a hummus recipe in there that uses peanut butter instead of tahini. Tahini is the traditional ingredient there. It's made from sesame paste or sesame, but it can be quite expensive, and sometimes it's hard to find in the grocery store. And honestly, peanut butter, you can't taste the difference. So just a quick example of a practical substitution that I love to see in cookbooks. And the 30-minute Mediterranean cookbook is one that we often recommend. And the Cancer Diet Cookbook here on the bottom right is another wonderful cookbook by Dion Detraz. She's a great dietitian, and I love that it breaks it down into different types of meals, and there are lots of high protein snack options in that cookbook as well. Moving on to some practical substitutions here. Mayonnaise is an often ingredient, especially in things like tuna salad or chicken salad. You can easily substitute it by just doing, even half and half yogurt, half mayonnaise. Maybe try adding a little bit of Dijon mustard to get a little bit more tartness there, or avocados are a creamy, healthy fat that can be a good substitution for mayonnaise. Rice, you can absolutely substitute it for brown rice, or even try doing half cauliflower rice or regular, or half brown rice, half regular white rice. And I do this often, and it can be challenging whenever you're cooking for a household. You're going to have picky eaters. You're going to have people that just want to stick with what they know. And so doing something halfway is a great option, a good compromise for everyone in your family. Whole wheat pasta is readily available now. My little quick tip for everyone is just to overcook it a little bit, and that will add a little bit of a more tender, softer mouthfeel that some people notice whenever they're switching to whole grain products. Sour cream and cream cheese are easily substituted for yogurt. Most people can't even taste the difference. And then with cheddar cheese, maybe try sticking to a stronger flavor that really is going to pack a punch and cut back on the serving size a little bit. With your vegetables, maybe stick with things that are a little bit more colorful versus iceberg or romaine. Try to go for things that have that strong, darker green color when you can. For beef, you can substitute it for a leaner ground beef when you can, or rinse off the fat. And then another good option is substituting for lentils. And if you have someone in the family that isn't a big fan of lentils, you could even try just doing half ground beef and half lentils and see if they even notice notice it at all. Bacon can be a really great addition to lots of meals because it does have that pretty unique flavor. But the big thing that bacon adds is like this savory flavor. So if you can try to substitute it for something else that mimics that umami or that savory flavor that we're looking for, then you can sometimes get away with cooking without it. Sun-dried tomatoes and, like Shelli mentioned, mushrooms are a really great option. And then breadcrumbs, try using maybe even ground oats or a crushed bran cereal to get a little bit more fiber there. Some additional suggestions for adding flavor, maybe try a new marinade, maybe get a little more adventurous with some different kinds of spices that you have in your pantry. If you're like me, I kind of stick to the same spices like garlic powder and cumin and chili powder, but maybe it's time to kind of go through your spice rack again and see what you have and kind of get a little more adventurous. These are some suggestions listed below. Maybe try varying your cooking method. So if you always do steamed broccoli, maybe try mixing it up and doing a different cooking method to see if we can get a little more variety or different texture with a different cooking method. Adding a different kind of little topping on top can sometimes be nice. So adding a little chili powder or red pepper flake to get a little bit more heat or some type of acid, so sprinkling a little bit of lemon juice can be nice, or even some more bold flavors such as pomegranate seeds. Those are somewhat coming out of season, unfortunately, but lots of great berries and things like that to add to things like oatmeal or yogurt for your breakfast. So some basic shopping tips. So really try to make a grocery list that will help you stay on track. And if you can do it, if it's feasible, even making your list in line with how you grocery shop. So keeping it in order based off of what, how you're walking through the grocery store, or doing some kind of grocery pickup is another great option. We can thank COVID for that. Now we have lots of options for grocery pickup, and that can be a great way to stick to your list. Set a budget and try to check specials. Again, like I mentioned, the things that are on sale are usually the seasonal produce items. So again, you're going to be getting more nutrition from those anyway if they're in season. Try to go when the store is less crowded, so that way you don't feel overwhelmed or pressured or rushed. We mentioned buying seasonally. Choose fresh or frozen over canned items when you can. Frozen fruit can be a really great option when those things are not in season, or if you're concerned that you're going to waste some of the food before you can eat it. Frozen is a wonderful option. And then looking at those labels like Shelli showed you to really make sure that you're purchasing something that doesn't have as much added sodium or added sugar, or kind of looking at those ingredients. Sometimes the front of the packaging can be misleading, and the purpose of the front of the packaging is to get you to pick up the item and put it in your cart. So in order to be a smarter consumer, you really do sometimes have to look at the back and really look at the label. Try not to shop whenever you're hungry. Try not to rely on those processed foods as much. And it's okay to lean on some processed ingredients at times. And if you have a really busy week, the pre-cut fruit and all of that is going to be more expensive, but sometimes that is worth it, if you're going to be really busy. So it's okay to have some of those things, but if you're only consuming those foods, then maybe relook at, take a second look at your grocery list and try to modify it in a few ways. Try not to succumb to those end cap aisles and the impulse purchases. So they put the bakery section at the front of the grocery store for a reason, so that way you smell the wonderful baked goods that they're cooking up. So just be really conscientious of that. Know that that's all part of their plan to get you to purchase those things, and try to be a wise and conscious consumer. And then try to be careful with advertising gimmicks, and that can sometimes come in a coupon or something that's delivered in the mail. Usually coupons are going to be for products that are heavily advertised, and because of that, they're also heavily processed. So just be a little more guarded with some of those coupons, and really ask yourself, is this something that I truly need, or am I just kind of being tempted by thinking that it's a good deal? And then how do we stock up on a healthy pantry? So just some basic ingredients, some things that can be helpful to have in your kitchen or in your pantry. So canned tuna can be a great source of those omega-3 fatty acids like Shelli mentioned, and canned and dried beans can produce a really quick meal at times. Whole grains, you want to make sure you have a good source of whole grains in your pantry. Peanut butter, and nuts and nut butter are really healthy fats, and are a great way to get in some quick nutrition when you're on the go, or you need something convenient. Canned tomato products, you can do so much with those, and so make sure you have a couple options available to you. Vinegar can be a great way to add a little bit of that acid, like I mentioned, or it can be a good option for making a homemade salad dressing. Some oil, some type of healthy cooking oil is going to be important to have. Making sure you have some good quick options such as frozen fruits and vegetables when you can. And then, like I said, kind of looking through your spice cabinet or spice drawer to see what you have available. We also wanted to include some more creative ways to use peanut butter and nut butters, because again, it can be a healthy fat. So if we're cutting out some of those unhealthy fats, we need to replace them with other things, so that way we can stay full and still get in good nutrition throughout the day. So peanut butter can be a really great option, great affordable option as well. You can put peanut butter on a waffle or toast. You can use it in a salad dressing or a stir fry, like a pad thai uses a peanut sauce usually. You can make a fruit dip with it, add it to smoothies, oatmeal, or even use it as a vegetable dip. And there's a quick recipe listed here below. Some additional cooking strategies. So batch cooking can be helpful for some people. So that's whenever you're preparing multiple meals. I also call it meal prep. We recognize that's not feasible for a lot of people, because although it's only taking a couple hours out of your week, it can be very exhausting. But if you do have the energy, or you have someone in your family that can help you, it can be a great way to consolidate some of that cooking time, and you can really stock up your freezer and your fridge with some healthy options. And then some quick fixes, some things to prepare and then have throughout the week would be things like boiled eggs, or serving or mixing up a large batch of brown rice can be nice to have on hand. Making an extra serving of chicken and just having that available for sandwiches. Cutting up your fruit and having it ready to go. It's just one more step to make sure that you have a quick, healthy option available to you. And then making some homemade salad dressings and marinades. So given the current climate right now, we're definitely experiencing more shortages and supply chain issues at the grocery store. We wanted to provide a quick slide here to just recognize some of those issues and give you some practical tips whenever you're shopping, hopefully to avoid a little bit of that frustration when you see something empty on the shelf. So try to be flexible on brands. I'm definitely loyal to certain brands myself, but now it's really not the time to, stick to just peanut butter or whatever it is. So just try to be flexible with whatever they have, within reason. Again, we don't want to purchase something that isn't an isn't a healthy option just because that's, the only thing that's available. But if it's just moving from, Pepsi or, one brand to the other, then it's likely going to be pretty comparable, pretty similar. Be willing to try something different. So, maybe it's a different type of cheese, or maybe it's normally you bake this recipe with honey and now you'll have to substitute it for something else. So just be willing to, keep an open mind with certain recipes and things like that. Maybe sometimes sometimes you're just going to have to make it yourself, and that can include like a specific spice blend. So just consider ways that you can make it on your own when you can. Whenever you are stocking up on things, consider the rule of 3, which is 1 for now and 2 for later. When you can, some things are not shelf stable long enough to stock up on that, but a good rule to keep in mind. Try to have a backup plan if you do have a recipe that you would like to prepare, but you know there's a specialty ingredient in it. Try to make sure that you have an alternate recipe that uses kind of similar ingredients, just in case it doesn't come up in your grocery pickup. And then maybe even consider starting kind of a small home garden. Gardening has really taken off with the pandemic, and it can also be a very healthy habit where you're getting a little bit of exercise and fresh air. So start with maybe a small herb garden and go from there. Also, and another great resource available through AnyStep is their Healthy Steps recipe kit. And you can find some more information on that on their website or contacting their program director, Angela Pierce. These are some additional resources that we wanted to cite here, some of the things that we have mentioned that you can maybe reference later on when you have your own time. And the diabetes manager, the prevention program that we mentioned is listed here through that CDC resource, the final link on this slide. And that concludes our presentation, and we will move forward with the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle and Shelli. Lots of really good information. And I'm glad to know personally that even small changes can make a big difference. So that is particularly helpful to me. So we have some really good comments and questions. And I'd like to start with one to either of you. You mentioned that olive oil, cooking with olive oil could be good. Is cooking with avocado oil just as good? It has a higher smoke point.
Thanks, Renee. I'll go ahead and take the first one. Yes, great question, and something to consider if you are someone that really likes to cook at high temperatures, such as sauteing, stir fries, and things like that. So olive oil does have a medium smoke point, so it is okay for certain cooking methods such as roasting or just a light saute. But if you are going to be cooking at a higher temperature, then a more heat-safe oil would be appropriate, and avocado oil is a really great alternative to that. It can be slightly more expensive, so if you're looking for a more affordable option, even something like a canola oil or a vegetable oil blend is good for those high heat temperatures.
Great, thank you. Another question has to do with organic fruit. You mentioned that strawberries were on the good list in one slide, but they were also on the dirty dozen list. Should we only be consuming organic strawberries? And are there other fruits that should only be organic?
Okay, I can take that one, and then Michelle, you can add in if you have anything to add. There's really no research to support the necessity of any organic food. So we know that it's the intake of fruits and vegetables, whatever the source, that is important. One thing we say is that if you do prefer organic, that's completely fine. The slide that showed the strawberries is the American Institute of Cancer Research, and so those are foods in general that are maybe helpful in prevention of cancer. The Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, that is additional resources that if you are interested in organic, what do they find, maybe it might be more beneficial to buy organic in. That being said, they have a really interesting tool where you can say, how many strawberries would it take like for a child or for a woman or for a man to eat before that level of pesticides reach the point where we have concern, and it's a ton, you know, more than you would ever eat. So that often gives people some you know, peace of mind there.
Great.
Michelle, anything to add?
Also, just that the most important thing, organic or not, is that you're washing your produce, because that is actually what's going to clean your fruits and vegetables more than whether it's organic or not. So organic produce, they still are allowed to use pesticides. It's only certain pesticides, but it isn't completely pesticide free. So, you know, even things like melons that you cut up, you still have to wash them to make sure that you're cleaning off all that residue.
All right, that is good to know. I have not been washing my melon, so my watermelon, so I will start doing that. Thank you. Few more questions. So another question coming out of your comment earlier, Michelle, about avoiding peas. What about pea protein, like protein powder mixed in with oatmeal?
Yeah, great question. So so peas are considered what's called like a starchy vegetable, but whenever they're refining that into a powder form, they're kind of extracting just the protein. So the powders aren't considered like a high carbohydrate source. It would just be if you were consuming the peas, you know, in whole food form. But the pea protein powders are a great way to get in some additional protein, and you know, great way to add some extra protein to fruit smoothies and things like that.
Just a couple more questions. Just want to ask, is it a cancer risk to microwave rice and other foods that come in plastic bowls and films that are microwavable?
Michelle, I'll let you take that one.
Okay.
I would say, yeah, no, she's more up on that piece.
Yeah, so the main concern now with plastic packaging is BPA. And BPA is an ingredient that can be found in some of our plastic products. And so you know, if you are microwaving something that is a BPA-free bowl, that should be safe, but you do want to be careful with like leftover containers and things like that, that you aren't quite sure whether it contains BPA or not. Really good question. And when in doubt, you know, you can always transfer it to another bowl that's glass or silicone, microwave safe.
Thank you. There's also a question about soy products, and I hear this a lot as well, an elevated cancer risk, especially breast cancer. Is soy safe?
Yeah, I'm glad somebody brought that up. Another great question. And we get that a lot, and especially our dietitian that does see the breast cancer patients. And that was a thought years and years ago, and that came out of studies with rats. And so rats don't have the same way that they metabolize soy. What we actually know now is that whole soy foods, so if you think of soy milk, edamame, tofu, they actually can be preventative for breast cancer, especially if young girls, adolescents, while they're developing, are eating those kinds of things, because they can actually block the estrogen receptors where, you know, breast cancers can start to develop. It's also a wonderful lean source of protein, and again, a way to add to your plant-based intake. So great question, but you know, absolutely the opposite of the old school mentality. No, I will say the soy isolates, so sometimes you'll see soy-based protein powders and bars, and we do say, you know, those may not be the best source of protein, only because the studies on the soy and the prevention of breast cancer really were done on whole soy foods. So not a huge risk, but to differentiate the difference there. So.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I know that's helpful for a lot of us. Okay. For those of us who are lactose intolerant and even have had to stop eating plain Greek yogurt, what do you recommend for instead of taking calcium pills? Or do you have a recommendation?
Great question. Yes, so most of the plant-based dairy alternatives on the market now are fortified with calcium. Some of them, including certain almond milks, actually have more calcium than regular traditional cow's milk. So those can be a great way to consume a little bit of additional calcium. Also, you do get some calcium from dark leafy greens. That can be a wonderful source. Certain fortified cereals, like breakfast cereals and things like that, do contain some calcium. And even small sources through other foods, we consider that to take up about an additional 300 milligrams of calcium per day. But if you are kind of tracking that and you do feel like you are a little bit deficient in your calcium intake, a supplement, it can be very helpful. We encourage our patients to only take about 500 milligrams of calcium in one sitting because that's all that our body can absorb. And so if you do need more than that, based off what you're consuming in your diet, then try to separate it and take it, about twice a day.
Great, thank you. I think we've come to the end of our Q&A time. So thank you both, and thank everyone for all of these great questions. And Sydney, did you want to wrap us up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, team from UT Southwestern, for this very timely information. My takeaways were reading labels and the resources slides. So the PowerPoint is going to be made available to the participants after the conclusion, not exactly immediately after. If you were one of the people who actually signed in under my name, Sydney Portilla Diggs, we'll make sure that you get a copy of it too. And I just wanted to say a special thanks to Renee Perry from the Senior Source who helped put this together. And it was really great. And I just thank everybody, and it was great to see you. And I'm looking forward to our next wellness webinar. With that, I will say goodbye, good afternoon, have a great day. Bye-bye, everyone.